Anyway, hi, hello, how you going? Today I'll be talking about the books I read over the last few months. I thought my other vid in May was late, but this is on another level. This is a truly belated what I read in April, May and June. I think I've delayed making this video as one, I'm never going to be able to say everything that I want to say, and two, I'm never going to be able to say it as neatly as I want to. So anyway, let's start with the books that I read in April. If I'm being perfectly honest, I just wasn't feeling it in April and I'm not going to force myself to read if I don't want to. Anyway, the first book I read in April was Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. I don't know why I chose to read Vanity Fair. Maybe my nan said something or I just decided it was time to read it. Honestly, I can't remember. This is my nan's copy and it runs 951 pages, so it's huge. Anyway, what to say about this enormous Victorian classic? It was published in 1847 to 48 and provides a satirical look at Regency society. Thackeray may have transposed the story to the Regency period as it would allow him to point out the self-serving, appalling nature of Victorian society without enduring the wrath of current readers. Each generation thinks that they're better than what came before, so the Victorians would have accepted the satire against the Regency without realising that Thackeray could also be exposing them as well. However, you lose some of the satire the further you're removed from the culture, and as we're even further removed, I'm sure that we don't understand everything Thackeray is trying to satirise. So what is Vanity Fair? Here I can include a quote straight from the narrator. But my kind reader will please to remember that this history has Vanity Fair for a title, and that Vanity Fair is a very vain, wicked, foolish place, full of all sorts of humbugs and falsenesses and pretensions. I guess that gives you a fair idea of what you're going to see and expect from this novel, where wealth, social status and reputation are prioritised above all else. So like a general blurb for this would be Vanity Fair is set in England against the backdrop of the Napoleonic Wars and contrasts the lives of two friends, the ambitious Rebecca Sharp and the kind and naive Emilia Sedley, as they navigate English society. Rebecca Sharp is the daughter of an opera singer and an artist. She is manipulative and uses her guile and personal charm to fulfill her ruthless ambition and self-interest to find a husband and improve her social status. And I think this quote kind of sums up what type of person Rebecca Sharp is. All the world used her ill, said this young misanthropist, and we may be pretty certain that persons whom all the world treats ill deserve entirely the treatment they get. The world is a looking glass and gives back to every man the reflection of his own face. And Emilia Sedley, who is kind, selfless, privileged and passive, she comes from a well-off family and is in love with or infatuated with George Osborne, a person from a wealthy family. And although we're supposed to dislike Becky, I found her to be the most entertaining character and preferred to read her chapters over Emilia's, as Emilia spent most of her time worshipping her repulsive husband who was unworthy of her, spoiling her revolting child and crying whenever she wasn't otherwise engaged. Then we have William Dobbin, who is a friend of George Osborne's and falls instantly in love with Emilia the first time he sees her. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but I don't believe in love at first sight. Like, not only do we have the frustrating, misplaced devotion of Emilia for her husband, but we also have Dobbin's misplaced devotion for Emilia. And I couldn't understand how Dobbin could still be in love with her after he gets to know her. Anyway, Emilia conforms to society's idealised notions of how a woman should behave and allows herself to sink further. Meanwhile, Becky does not. She breaks rules to get what she wants, she's ambitious, and that could be why I just wanted to read the chapters that followed her. Now we come to the question, is a novel bad if you dislike the characters? There's not many characters to like in Vanity Fair, but what did I expect when its extended title is Vanity Fair, a novel without a hero, while also satirising the worst parts of society? This is where we can run into problems. Some people won't read a book unless there are likeable characters or a self-insert character, so they would say that a book like this is bad. However, there is also a difference between an unlikable character and a character that is just poorly written, as poorly written characters can definitely make a book bad. Emma Woodhouse from Emma by Jane Austen, Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and Becky Sharp may be unlikable characters, but they are well executed in their disagreeable behaviours and make the plot engaging. It also helps that they are part of excellent, well-written books. So ultimately, I would say no. A book is not bad even if you dislike the characters. Throughout the novel, the narrator interjects frequently and breaks the fourth wall by remarking on the story. Although I didn't select this quote to illustrate this, it is still an example of this. As his hero and heroine pass the matrimonial barrier, the novelist generally drops the curtain, as if the drama were over then, the doubts and struggles of life ended. As if, once landed in the marriage country, all were green and pleasant there, and wife and husband had nothing to do but to link each other's arms together and wander gently downwards towards old age in happy and perfect fruition. This stood out to me as this is exactly what happens in most novels or films, where the main characters get together in the end and we're left to wonder what happens next. Is it happily ever after all? I would now like to talk about misrepresented quotes like this: "He was her sun and moon," which is a nice quote in isolation, right? But when you get the context of who it is in reference to, it changes how you read it. This is the thought of Emilia Sedley about Lieutenant George Osborne, and you know my opinions on that couple. Why do the worst people have the nicest things said about them? Nicest quotes in the novel. Like in Pride and Prejudice, where we have the quote, "I declare after all there is no enjoyment like reading. How much sooner one tires of anything than of a book. When I have a house of my own, I shall be miserable if I have not an excellent library." Which is a sentiment I can get behind, but when you're given context, Miss Bingley's attention was quite as much engaged in watching Mr. Darcy's progress through his book as in reading her own, and she was perpetually either making some inquiry or looking at his page. She could not win him, however, to any conversation. He merely answered her question and read on. At length, quite exhausted by the attempt to be amused with her own book, which she had only chosen because it was the second volume of his, she gave a great yawn and said, "How pleasant it is to spend an evening in this way! I declare, after all, there is no enjoyment like reading. How much sooner one tires of anything than of a book. When I have a house of my own, I shall be miserable if I have not an excellent library." No one made any reply. She then yawned again, threw aside her book, and cast her eyes around the room in quest of some amusement. This changes the interpretation of the quote, as we see Miss Bingley is completely insincere. I just want to say, I've never heard of the name Makepeace. It's quite Puritan actually, like praise God Barebone, who was a member of Oliver Cromwell's parliament during the interregnum. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. Vanity Fair was an interesting, entertaining novel and I enjoyed reading it. Anyway, all I can say is that Vanity Fair is definitely a very vain, wicked, foolish place. Then I read Maidens of the Cave by Lloyd Devereux Richards, which is one of my advent calendar books. It is a thriller and I really enjoyed it. As much as you can enjoy any book that deals with murder. I say the same thing about Agatha Christie. I'm enjoying it, but you know, in real life this would be quite serious. Very serious. So anyway, there is a man who is murdering female university students, and we follow FBI forensic anthropologist Christine Prusik as she tries to solve the case, but she also has to deal with the restructuring of her division, a new boss, and also finding a leak or mole in her team. It is interesting reading a sequel without reading the first book, as there are probably references to it, but I have no idea. It's also fun putting things together, as when we open the novel, there is a lot of restructuring in a division as a result of what happened in the previous book. Then later in the novel we're introduced to, what's his name? Sheriff Joe McFarren, who I assume we've met before, as Christine and him are acting a little bit weird and you're like, oh, these two already know each other, and it's true. Turns out that they dated but have broken up. As with Red Dragon, we have multiple points of view with alternating chapters between Christine, the suspects, victims and the murderer. There is also some more discourse about people who were abused in childhood becoming murderers, where we can have empathy for the child who was abused but not for the monster they choose to become. Whilst reading, you'll be able to put all the clues together before Christine does, as we have access to multiple points of view that she doesn't. But it is enjoyable to see her finally put everything together. Anyway, I thought it was really well written and the pacing was really good. I just wanted to keep reading after finishing each chapter and ultimately read it relatively quickly. I think I'm going to check out the first book in the series, Stone Maidens. I also think Richard's released another book this year, so I'll have to check that one out too. And the last book I read in April was the third part of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. I left it to the dying days of April, as I think subconsciously I didn't want it to end. It was the last, but it certainly was not the least. As with The Fellowship and The Two Towers, I think I'll just read what's on the back of this book. The armies of the Dark Lord are massing as his evil shadow spreads even wider. Men, dwarves, elves and ents unite forces to do battle against the dark. Meanwhile, Frodo and Sam struggle further into Mordor in their heroic quest to destroy the One Ring. So the structure is a little bit similar to The Two Towers, where the first book recounts the adventures of Gandalf, Pippin, Merry, Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli, and the second book follows Frodo and Sam. In book 5, the members of the Fellowship are mostly separated, and we follow each member as they prepare and recruit armies for the upcoming battle against Sauron. Gandalf and Pippin are in Minas Tirith, warning Denethor that war is imminent. Merry is with Theoden in Rohan, preparing for the battle. Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli take the path of the dead to recruit the dead men. Then in book 6, we're finally reunited with Sam and Frodo, where Frodo has been taken by orcs and Sam is trying to rescue him. Sam ends up rescuing Frodo from the Tower of Cirith Ungol. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing the names. I haven't continued with the movies, so yeah. After rescuing Frodo, they continue their quest and travel across Mordor. I think I'm going to now share a part that I thought was really beautiful. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. It shows that there is still light in the darkest of places. There is still hope within the shadow of despair. The glimpse of this singular star provides Sam with the courage to continue the treacherous journey across Mordor and to carry Frodo, who is carrying the hope of the world. Then at the Cracks of Doom, Gollum reappears. There is a struggle for the ring where Gollum ends up biting off Frodo's finger with the ring still on it, which kind of draws a parallel to Sauron, who had his finger cut off when Isildur took the ring. The ring is destroyed and Sauron is defeated. Yay! Unlike book 4 of The Two Towers, where everyone remains separated, in book 6 the two halves converge. The Fellowship is reunited and Aragorn is crowned King of Gondor. Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin then travel back to the Shire. I thought they could go home and live happily ever after, but no. The Shire has been destroyed. Like, have they not gone through enough? It has been taken over by a person called Sharky, which is later revealed to be Saruman. The hobbits free the Shire of Saruman and restore it. After a while, Frodo still isn't himself. He may have saved Middle-earth, but it was at a huge cost, and he isn't comfortable in the Shire. He no longer belongs there, so he leaves. He reunites with Bilbo and they leave for the Undying Lands to find peace. We can kind of relate it to World War I, the war Tolkien fought in, the many sacrifices people made so that we can have normal lives, and the trauma of returning soldiers, returning to a world that doesn't understand them. At Frodo and Bilbo's departure, Sam, Merry and Pippin come to say goodbye. It's quite emotional and Gandalf says, "I will not say, do not weep, for not all tears are an evil." Gandalf reminds us to let the tears out, feel the emotion rather than suppress it. Tears are natural and are expected at times of great emotion, especially the impending departure of close friends. Then after this, when Sam returns to his family in the Shire, he says simply, "Well, I'm back." a clean and simple way to conclude. And just like that, we've finished The Lord of the Rings. Who'd have thought? Am I supposed to condense this whole saga down to one lesson, one moral? Well, if I had to, I would say it would be about the importance of friendship, of loyalty, but there are so many lessons that are imparted through the exceptionally beautiful writing of J.R.R. Tolkien that it's hard to choose. And I'd like to say thank you to Aaron from Booked and Busy and the co-host for organising the read-along, as I have really enjoyed reading the books. I'm not sure if fantasy is for me, but I'm glad to have read them. I may have never got to them of my own volition, so thank you. And I look forward to revisiting Middle-earth again soon. So now we can remove The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings from the books I'd like to relist. Oh. And now we'll move on to what I read in May. So the first thing I read in May was The Dead by James Joyce. The Dead is Joyce's final story in his short story collection, The Dubliners, from 1914, and is long enough to be considered a novella. I read this online, as with most works that are in the public domain. Anyway, it is the first thing by Joyce that I have read, and I decided to read it as it was mentioned in a part of Autumn by Ellie Smith that I couldn't stop thinking about. Anyway, The Dead is about a Christmas party given by Kate and Julia Morkan, two elderly Dublin ladies, that is attended by their nephew Gabriel Conroy and his wife. While the party is festive, full of dancing and food, it is also pervaded by political, religious and sexual tensions, as well as memories of loss. When Gabriel and his wife go home at the end of the night, she reveals a long-kept secret that leads to an epiphany. Now let's get to the part that I was so intrigued by in Autumn. Greta, Gabriel's wife, hears a song at the dinner party that used to be sung to her, and as music is a powerful carrier of memory, it revives one of when she was dating a young man, Michael Fury. He was of delicate constitution, and when he finds out that she's going to be sent to a convent, he risks his health to visit her, where in the cold and rain he sings to her an Irish folk song, The Lass of Aughrim, professing his love. I implored of him to go home at once and told him he would get his death in the rain, but he said he did not want to live, and he dies soon after. Greta reveals this to Gabriel, which leads to his epiphany, which might be epiphany worthy to him, but I don't think it would be for a lot of people. He realizes that he doesn't truly know his wife as deeply as he thought. He realizes that she is a real person with a past and that her life doesn't solely revolve around him. The final sentence: his soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling like the descent of their last end upon all the living and the dead, is a poignant line showing that Gabriel has had another more profound epiphany about life and death as he watches the snow-covering island. The Dead is concerned with the temporary nature of life and the inevitability of death, and how we're all connected in the interim of time and space, how someday the living will one day be dead. Life is as ephemeral as snow. And I can now see why it was referenced in Autumn. Then I read The Watsons by Jane Austen, which is an unfinished novel. I mean, really it is a fragment of a novel. It was published in 1871 and named by her nephew. I'm just going to read the summary from the Jane Austen Society of Australia. The story is set in the village of Stanton in Surrey. The Watsons are a large family with very little money, and the Reverend Mr. Watson is in failing health. His daughter Emma has been living with relatives for many years, but her aunt's marriage has brought about Emma's return to the paternal home. She has to get to know her siblings and attend a local ball and get to know the neighbours. My favourite part, or otherwise known as the best scene in the novel, is definitely the ball scene, as we get to meet the potential suitors for Emma Watson, Tom Musgrave, Lord Osborne and Mr. Howard. And we also see Emma's character when she sees a young boy, Charles Blake, who had been promised a dance by another and then left without a partner, and Emma, seeing the injustice, chooses to dance with him. Also, why did I think Mr. Howard was old the first time I read it? Maybe it's because his sister has an 11-year-old son and maybe because of his supposed romance with Lady Osborne, which would definitely have made an interesting love triangle. A 30-year-old man, a 19-year-old woman and a 50-year-old woman. I wanted to reread the Watsons again with the intention of determining what comes up in her other novels. Miss Emma Watson has similarities to Fanny in Mansfield Park, as they were both sent to live with their rich aunt and uncle in childhood and then sent back to their birth families. She also has similarities with Emma, as she was to be an heiress, and similarities to Elizabeth Bennet, as she is astute to the vulgarities of her family. I thought that Mr. Watson had more in common with Mr. Woodhouse. However, Mr. Woodhouse is a hypochondriac and Mr. Watson is actually in poor health. Mr. Watson also has similarities to Mr. Bennet, as he likes to read. He really only likes to converse with his smarter daughters, and they both are going to leave their daughters in a precarious position upon their death, although Mr. Watson's death is more imminent. Then we have Tom Musgrave, and his similarities to Henry Crawford from Mansfield Park, as he's going through each of the Watson sisters, like Henry Crawford with the Bertram sisters and Fanny. Even Lord Osborne kind of gives off Mr. Darcy vibes. The fragment overall has similarities to Pride and Prejudice, from the unmarried daughters and the husband hunting to the characterization of multiple characters. However, the Watsons has a pinch more desperation when compared with Pride and Prejudice, and I can kind of see why she would abandon it. The Watsons, although a fragment, provides an interesting look at unmarried women, and Emma's consensus that she would rather remain unmarried than pick an unsuitable husband is still good advice for today. I think the only disappointing thing about the fragment is what it could have been. We know what was to happen in the novel, as Cassandra had been told, but we'll never get to experience it through Jane Austen's writing. The next book I read was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I had borrowed from the library and has since been returned, but everyone knows what it looks like with their iconic emerald green dress. And I think everyone knows about The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but if you don't, it's a historical fiction novel about love, scandal and fame. It focuses on the aging and reclusive Hollywood movie icon Evelyn Hugo, who is finally ready to tell the truth about her glamorous and scandalous life. When she chooses unknown magazine reporter Monique Grant for the job, no one in the journalism community is more astounded than Monique herself. Why her? Why now? As Evelyn tells her story, we learn about her 7 marriages, who the actual love of her life was, and the real reason why Monique was chosen. The novel contains short chapters, which makes it so easy to read, and I couldn't stop reading as I just wanted to know what happened next. It also includes newspaper articles, tabloids and blog posts interspersed throughout the narrative to show the media spin. But I did find that I wasn't that interested in the chapters that focused on Monique, as she kind of just felt like a vessel for Evelyn's story to be told. This section may contain some spoilers, so beware, but I thought that Evelyn was going to have had a relationship with Monique's father, James Grant, which would explain why Monique was picked. However, that's not what happened, and from what actually happened, I think that the connection between Monique and her father should have been built up a bit more, as we don't know him, which would also maybe help Monique's characterization too. There's also a part where Monique's mum sent her dad's photos. He was a photographer, if I didn't mention that, and I thought that there was going to be photos of Evelyn, or even photos with Harry in them, and then Monique would go back to Evelyn and be like, "My dad knew Harry. What the hell?" And Evelyn would then explain to her what we learned from the big reveal. But anyway, that doesn't happen, so it doesn't matter. It's one of those novels that if you dislike unlikable characters, you might not enjoy this, but I thought it was really good. I found it to be captivating and I couldn't stop reading, especially the chapters with Evelyn recounting her life. Then I reread Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This was my 4th time reading Wuthering Heights. I have read it in May every year for the past 4 years, and honestly, autumn is the perfect time to read this book. You can feel the cold of the moors. Wuthering Heights was published in 1847 and was Emily Bronte's only novel. I'm just going to use a blurb that I see everywhere. I don't know who wrote it, and the closest I got was that it was provided by publisher. Lockwood, the new tenant of the Rushcross Grange on the bleak Yorkshire moors, is forced to seek shelter one night at Wuthering Heights, the home of his landlord. There he discovers the history of the tempestuous events that took place years before, of the intense passion between the foundling Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw, and a betrayal of him. As Heathcliff's bitterness and vengeance is now visited upon the next generation, their innocent heirs must struggle to escape the legacy of the past. Wuthering Heights is one of my favourite books. I think you could tell by the number of times I've read it, but I like it for its beautiful writing, its atmospheric setting, its complex characters, and its unique structure with the mirroring and doubling of the characters from the first and the second generation, and also the unreliable narrators. Mr. Lockwood is told the story of the inhabitants by the housekeeper Nellie Dean, and we're reading it through his diary entries, so a lot of layers. And it's not really a love story, it's about revenge, passion, and the destructive nature of love. Now I just want to share a quote when I could include so many. It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now, so he shall never know how I love him, and that not because he's handsome, Nelly, but because he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same, and Linton's is as different as a moonbeam from lightning or frost from fire. Then we come to the 2026 Wuthering Heights film by Emerald Fennell, starring Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi. I wonder if it will include the second generation and the frame narrative, or is this going to be like Persuasion 2022, which is in itself a good film if you remove it from the source material. Like, that is certainly not my Aunt Elliot. Anyway, it is a Vegemite book. Some people love it and some people despise it, but for me it is one of my favourites. There is a lot I could say about Wuthering Heights, so I might need to make a video dedicated to it. And to end May, I read Weyward by Emilia Hart. Weyward is an interesting historical fiction novel about three women who are connected through the centuries by a cottage in Cumbria known as Weyward Cottage. We follow the lives of three women from one family line who go against the grain, fighting against their personal situations to improve their lives and find their inner power. We have Kate in 2019 who is fleeing an abusive partner, Violet, a teenager in 1942 who struggles against her strict upbringing, and Elsa, a young woman in 1619 who's been accused of using witchcraft. And as we read, we come to learn that the Weyward women have an uncanny connection with animals and nature, which all three women must embrace in order to overcome the oppression in their lives. Each section was interesting to read and each character had their own unique voice, but I think I was most drawn to Elsa's as it was shown through diary entries that are then read by Violet and Kate, and each woman contributes to the diary, helping the next woman out. There were some dark parts in the book and parts that I'll have to skip over when I reread, but it was a really good book and it was well written and I found it to be very interesting. And now we'll move on to what I read in June. In June, Katie from Books and Things celebrated her 10th anniversary of being on BookTube, and in honour of the milestone, she decided to host the 10 years of Books and Things readathon, which I decided to partake in. The prompts were to read a classic and to read a work of historical fiction. The first book I read in June was Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I think that this is my absolute favourite Sally Rooney novel, and the thing is, I can say that, I can think that, I can feel that, but I can't articulate why exactly. If I was just reading it and wasn't going to share my thoughts on it, I could go on peacefully with it. But now that I kind of want to document what I read each month, I have to try and organise my thoughts and think critically about the book. Anyway, this is why I like this book so much from the best of my abilities. It is a literary fiction novel, but may also be classified as a romance book. However, I feel that it is more of a complicated character study rather than a romance. It explores intimacy and relationships, such as messy family and romantic relationships. It also explores trauma and grief and how people can change one another. Intermezzo follows two brothers who are grieving the recent loss of their father. The older brother, Peter, is a successful lawyer in his 30s who has a messy personal life. He He is still in love with his ex-girlfriend who, as a result of an accident, broke up with him, and also has a new girlfriend who is young and dependent on him. And the younger brother, Ivan, who is a competitive chess player. He is socially awkward, but he is a sensitive and empathetic young man who falls in love with an older woman. I enjoyed reading Ivan's point of view more than Peter's. Not that I didn't like reading his parts, it's just that they were a little bit harder to read as it was written in stream of consciousness. So what is an intermezzo? An intermezzo is a short connecting instrument movement in an opera or other musical work. The relationship between the brothers is tense as they misinterpret and misrepresent each other, and I guess that the death of their father brings both together, connects them like an intermezzo. It also explores the nature of age gap relationships and reveals Peter's hypocrisy. Peter, who's like 32, 33, has a girlfriend, Naomi, who's 23, and we have Ivan, who's 22, and Margaret, who's 36. And when Peter finds out, he freaks out, like Margaret is taking advantage of Ivan, which is maybe how he views his relationship with Naomi. Peter is also especially concerned with how others perceive him and how it determines how he lives and the decisions he makes, as he wants to live right and has a compulsive need to be good and be normal. And now for some quotes that stood out to me. First is said by Ivan, who is quite introspective. Imagine it's said in an Irish accent. Okay? You know, I don't think I would have become this really popular guy just from not playing chess. You can drive yourself crazy thinking about different things you could have done in the past. But sometimes I think actually I didn't have that much power over my life anyway. I mean, I couldn't give myself a new personality out of nothing, and things just kind of happened to me. I think everybody has thought about if they had done things differently, how things would be if they had. I always wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't been so shy when I was younger, and have since tried to be more outgoing, but sometimes I think the shyness is innate. And then a couple quotes about life. And what if life is just a collection of essentially unrelated experiences? Why does one thing have to follow meaningfully from another? To love just these few people, to know myself capable of that, I would suffer every day of my life. Intermezzo also shows how love can lead to healing and how you don't need to be healed to be loved or to love. I really enjoyed reading Intermezzo, and it is probably the most sentimental of all her novels. And now for the obligatory ranking of the novels. Why are we inclined to rate books by the same author? I would rate them Normal People, Beautiful World, Where Are You? Sorry, I had to think about that. I always go to say wow though. Conversations with Friends, and then Intermezzo. Also, from what I've seen online, people who love Normal People don't really like Conversations with Friends or Beautiful World, Where Are You? And now probably Intermezzo too. The next book I read was North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I chose this for the Read a Classic prompt. I was going to read Middlemarch, but I thought better not, as I think Katie has an aversion to George Eliot's writing. Anyway, North and South was published serially from 1854 to 1855 in Charles Dickens's Household Words, and is the first Elizabeth Gaskell novel that I've read. I borrowed it from the library and it has since been returned. North and South is considered a social novel, as it provides social commentary on class, industrialization, and social inequality in a manufacturing town. When her father leaves the church in a crisis of conscience, Margaret Hale is uprooted from her comfortable home in Hampshire to move with her family to the north of England. Initially repulsed by the ugliness of her new surroundings in the industrial town of Milton, Margaret becomes aware of the poverty and suffering of the local mill workers and develops a passionate sense of social justice. This is intensified by her tempestuous relationship with the mill owner and self-made man John Thornton, as their fierce opposition over his treatment of his employees masks a deeper attraction. I have seen North and South compared to Pride and Prejudice, as there are some similarities with the central love story. It's like Pride and Prejudice with industrialization. I think hearing this comparison may have slightly affected how I read the book, and I think I might like it more upon rereading, although I did still enjoy it, don't get me wrong. And I'm also intrigued by Wives and Daughters, also by Gaskell, as I've seen it compared to Mansfield Park. So my nan read it. She heard on the radio that they were making a new adaptation of Wives and Daughters, and she asked me if I'd read any Elizabeth Gaskell, and funnily enough I had just read this. So I lent it to her and she enjoyed it. What she did say to me was that Margaret was idealising the South too much. She was critical of the treatment of the poor in Milton, but didn't really see the poverty in the South, which is something that is changed later in the book. But Margaret does say this early in the book. Now, in the South we have our poor, but there is not that terrible expression in their countenances of a sullen sense of injustice which I see here, which shows that the poor class relations are not an exclusively industrial problem. It's just that when compared to the suffering of the poor in Milton, the poor in the South were treated with more compassion. North and South has it all really. It is written in beautiful prose, includes great characterization. I was so intrigued by Margaret's character, as she was kind and caring but also prideful and prejudiced. The plot was entertaining, with the misinterpretations and the miscommunications, especially between Margaret and John Thornton, as they realised their affection for each other. It is a really great book and I can see why Katie would recommend it. Then, to continue the 10 years of books and things readathon, I read The Secrets of Hartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden, which is Katie's own debut novel and is perfect for the second prompt, read a work of historical fiction. The Secrets of Hartwood Hall is a work of historical fiction set in the Victorian era. I have been looking forward to reading this novel for a while, and I was confident in Katie's abilities as she knows the Victorian period. Katie has said that she wants to write historical fiction that wouldn't necessarily come out during that time. She doesn't want her work to pretend to be a Victorian novel. So we get the best parts of Victorian literature without the moralising, and it's also much easier to read. Katie writes historical fiction that is in conversation with Victorian literature, and therefore she's able to write about things that would have been taboo. In The Secrets of Hartwood Hall, we follow 29-year-old Margaret Lennox, who's recently widowed and has been left penniless by her late husband, so she has to return to work as a governess. Her new place of employment is at Hartwood Hall, where she is introduced to her mysterious employer, the widower Mrs. Evesham, and her 10-year-old son, Louis. We follow as she builds relationships with the family and the staff of the hall, especially the gardener, Paul Carter. The novel explores themes of class, marriage, and gender, and as Katie is not staunch in the Victorian morals and ideals, she is able to redefine Victorian women. It is a homage to Victorian literature and is especially a love letter to the Bronte's novels, such as Jane Eyre and The Tenant of Bardfell Hall, as it has the flair for the Gothic, though I'll probably pick up on more references once I read more Victorian literature. I just wanted to keep reading, as I wanted to find out the mysteries and secrets. I'm not sure if some people might not be into the resolution of the romantic subplot, but I didn't mind it. It is quite fast paced and I read it in 3 days, which is really fast for me. The Secrets of Hartwood Hall is a wonderful book with excellent writing, an engaging story and interesting characters. And now I very much look forward to reading Katie's other novel, The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hurst. And the last book I read in June was Winter by Ellie Smith. I borrowed this book from the library, which had since been returned, and started reading it on the 21st of June, which was the winter solstice. It is the second novel in Ellie Smith's seasonal quartet. Although it is the second novel, you don't need to read autumn to read this. Winter follows members of a family that are unwillingly thrown together at Christmas. We have Sophia Cleves, who lives alone in a large house in Cornwall. She's having hallucinations of a child's head, which is a manifestation of her mental state, something like that. Then we have Arthur Cleves, who is Sophia's son. Similarly to his mum, he also has a lonely existence. He works by himself and also writes a blog called Art in Nature, which is hijacked by his ex-girlfriend Charlotte. Art is supposed to be spending Christmas with his mum and Charlotte in Cornwall, but as Charlotte is no longer coming and he doesn't want to tell his mum that they broke up, he hires a young woman, Lux, to pretend to be Charlotte. Lux is an immigrant and her role as an outsider and objective observer is important in reconnecting the family. And then we have Sophia's estranged sister Iris, They were close when they were younger but grew apart when Iris became an activist. It was June when I read this, so obviously it isn't Christmas time, so it felt kind of strange reading a Christmas book. I know some people have Christmas in July so that they can have a winter Christmas, but still. Anyway, Ellie Smith opens Winter with the statement, "God was dead to begin with," which is a variation of the statement "God is dead," made by German philosopher Nietzsche, and Charles Dickens's opening sentence of A Christmas Carol, "Marley was dead to begin with." And once again we have a reference to Charles Dickens in the opening sentence. Now I'm interested to see how spring starts. Within Ellie Smith's books, well, at least in the two I've read so far, there is definitely more of a focus on themes than on plot. So let's get the major one out of the way first. As with Autumn, we explore the cyclical nature of time, how it keeps passing and the seasons keep coming, and how we live in relation to the things that come before us, just like how past and present literature is linked. It doesn't truly exist on its own. The inclusion of references to other books, plays and films from different eras, such as Shakespeare's The Tragedy of Cymbeline from the 17th century, Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol from the 19th century, and the films G.I. Blues, The Great Dictator and National Velvet from the 20th century, shows how works build on each other, how we move forward and keep going. I know that this is probably going to be a theme in each of the books of the quartet as it's inherently linked with the seasons. Another theme or something that is explored in Winter is authenticity, or how things may not be as they seem. First of all, we have Art, who fakes his blog posts about nature. He writes stories about places he finds on his computer instead of writing about his own authentic experience. Then we have people pretending to be others. Charlotte, Art's ex, pretends to be him on his Twitter, and Lux pretends to be Charlotte. Then in National Velvet, which is a novel by Enid Bagnold and also a film with Elizabeth Taylor, and is about a girl who pretends to be a male jockey so that she can ride her horse in the Grand National Steeplechase. And so that's a disguise. And then also in Shakespeare's Cymbeline, Imogen disguises herself as a page Fideli to look for her exiled husband Posthumus. And then Cloden disguises himself as Posthumus to commit murder, and the two princes that were kidnapped are now living under different names as they don't know their royal heritage, and their kidnapper also goes under a pseudonym. So yeah, a lot of disguises and things not being as they seem. And now I'd like to include a couple of passages that resonated with me. I might not go as far as that, but parts that I liked, yes. The first one is early in the novel where Art and Lux are taking the train to Cornwall and they are having a conversation and getting to know each other. This part was interesting in the way it was formatted, as the dialogue is disjointed. We have Art's conversation on one page and Lux's on the other. And then the second one is later in the novel and is set sometime in the future when Art is old and he's sitting with a child on his lap and they're reading A Christmas Carol together. When the child is struck by the word today, or today, as it is spelt in the book, the child is asking, how do you day? Today as in to run, to jump, to read. And this makes Art contemplate on how do you day. He thinks about how, whatever being alive is, with all its pasts and presents and futures, it is most itself in the moments when you surface from a depth of numbness or forgetfulness that you didn't even know you were at and break the surface. Also funny that they're reading A Christmas Story in June too. I liked it, I think. As with Autumn, I'm not sure what to feel about it. I like the style and the use of language. I find the way that Ellie Smith plays with language and structure really interesting. Right now I think Autumn might be slightly better, but my opinion is subject to change. All that being said, I am looking forward to reading part 3 of the seasonal quartet. Anyway, I have babbled on quite enough. That was every book I read in April, May and June. Let me know what you've been reading, and thank you so much. See you later. Goodbye.